If you've ever been out prospecting and thought that Bigfoot might be chucking rocks at you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because actually in this area here that we're going to be looking at, when I had access to it, there were a few times we thought Bigfoot was out there with us. So let's get into the video here. So today I want to talk about a different prospecting method I haven't ever heard anybody else bring up before, and that is using, we'll call them pinch points in a creek to prospect for ancient pay streaks that have long since been buried under the floodplain. So we're going to get into it here and try and learn something new. So this prospecting method I've come up with is, at least generally from what I know, going to work best in the East Coast Piedmont, where we have creeks whose valleys generally have very broad, wide, flat floodplains. These are not V-shaped valleys. These are kind of almost large U-shaped valleys. And this is because in these areas there are river gravels under the floodplain, because the creek has meandered through this whole area here. And these floodplains, we know from various scientific testing on the East Coast here, predominantly OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, that these floodplains here are approximately about 9,000 years old. So this creek has meandered through this floodplain over 9,000 years. And it probably was depositing and transporting gold much more at various points in that 9,000 years than it is currently. So with that being known, there's a good chance that there are far richer ancient pay streaks buried under these floodplains. But the question is how do you locate those? And that is going to be the primary thought behind this pinch point sampling method. Okay, so the areas on this map that I've highlighted in orange represent the floodplains of this creek. I've just done a small area here, but they represent the current floodplains of this creek. And generally you're talking about 15 foot of overburden or more of floodplain material, silts and sands covering up the base gravel layers of the ancient creeks. But with that, there's a good chance that there's ancient channels running through here that are far richer in gold than the current. And we'll just say that that's now the blue area that you see. So this blue represents a plausible channel that the ancient creek used to run through that is now buried. But the main thing is that the active creek channel does cross that ancient channel at various points. And the easiest way to locate it is from pinch points in the existing creek. And what I mean by pinch points is when you have bends in the creek and one side is bounded by a cliff face and the other side of the creek is also bounded by a cliff face. So what we see here is this area right here is a cliff and this area right here is a cliff, meaning that regardless of the channel that it took, this ancient creek had to pass through this little stretch at some point. So those are going to be your best points. And some creeks have a bunch of these points, some don't. Because here's another one. This is a cliff face and this is a cliff face. So it's had to pass through that bounded area. And there's a number of other examples of it through here. As you see through here, it doesn't. So right here is a cliff face. And right here is a cliff face. But that's a much larger area to cover and sample. But hopefully you get the idea from that. Like, this is a cliff face, and this is a cliff face. So this ancient channel's had to cross somewhere through here in those 9,000 years. And what you want to do is find those in the field where you have cliff face on one side of the creek, predominantly on a turn a lot of times, and a cliff face on the other. And that bounds the channel there. Whereas if you're sampling in some of these other spots, like these long straightaways, the ancient pay streak could be off under the floodplain and not cross anywhere there. So that's the predominant idea here. And here I'll give you, this is actually an area that I sampled and came across a decent little pay streak there for a bit. So we'll get into that here. So the easiest way to find these ancient pay streak channels is the sample, once again, where you're bounded by the two cliff faces at a pinch point, basically. Otherwise, you could try and sample the whole creek, but a lot of times that's going to be time prohibitive for most of us. So you want to pick your battles on the spots where you're going to prospect to have the most likely chance. So if we look at this here, generally what I would start doing is you would start kind of back around here by the cliff face, and you'd start punching samples and get an idea of what the background gold is. And as you approach, like this little blue channel, probably an ancient one from this feeder creek. As you approach, you should, and you hit that, you should get a much better sample once you punch. And then as you keep moving forward, it should drop down, and then it should start picking back up as you get to the bigger channel. And that's kind of what I found in this actual exact spot. Is we had a decent amount of background gold in here, but not enough to be worth running. And as we kept punching sample holes forward, we hit a nice area here where there was a couple, we started running this whole area, and there was a couple 3-4 gram days. And then it started to drop back down. And I haven't been able to continue moving forward here yet due to access issues to this property, but one would surmise that eventually it would pick back up here where we start crossing this larger ancient channel. And that's generally how you want to do these samples here, is record your time spent versus the amount of gold found and get an idea of what it's running in the area. And then as you hit the pay streaks, it should become obvious that you've hit a increased amount of gold. And then you can start running those areas. And the funny thing is here, this is East Coast, is that the best part of this gold from this specific area was on the outside turn. There was a bunch of concreted hardpack out on this outside turn here that had the best gold. And as you actually came to the inside of the turn, it was all loose flow sand and loose gravels with almost nothing in them. So with East Coast stuff, particularly in the southeast Piedmont regions, I don't pay attention to inside turns that much. I prefer to sample for the ancient pay streaks and everything, where the chunkier gold is. So that's how I would go about doing this prospecting right through here. And as you can see, we'll go over to this old mine that just shows you that there is gold under the entire floodplain. Is when you look at these valleys like this here, they dug the entire floodplain valley up because there was gold on it. And even with this here, it seems like they were on a hotter streak through some of it where there's more tailings. So there's going to be the ancient channels buried under that floodplain that are much richer in gold because at various points in the past 9,000 years, the conditions to move gold have been much better than what they are now. And that's what kind of leads to this process. I wouldn't call them fossil placers, but you'd call them ancient pay streaks that have been left behind and abandoned under the floodplains. So, let's keep going. Okay. So while I like to use LiDAR to show this method because it just outlines everything much nicer, this is something that you don't necessarily need LiDAR to do. Your traditional topo maps can very much be used for this as well. As you can see here, you can, hang on, come on. As you see here, you can delineate out the floodplains with this fairly well, not as accurately as with the LiDAR, but it will give you points to check out. And then once you're in the field, it's very easy to use this method and figure it out. So that's just another thing. Like I said, you don't need LiDAR to do this. You can do it with topo and being in the field just by itself. But it helps you pick those spots to focus on where that ancient channel that has much more gold than what the existing channel probably does. So yeah, that's about it for this video. If you like what you've heard and you would want to subscribe, please do, because we'll be posting more content like this. And see you out there in the field.